Venezuela sits on over 300 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, the largest in the world. To put that in perspective, that is enough oil to power the entire United States for more than 40 years. Yet despite this incredible wealth beneath its soil, Venezuela's oil industry has completely collapsed. Now, with Venezuela's president captured, the US claims American companies are ready to rush in and revive Venezuela's oil production. But is it really that simple? Today, we are diving deep into the complex reality of Venezuelan oil and why Washington's optimistic vision might be a lot harder to achieve than they think. Let us start with some history. Venezuela was not always in crisis. In fact, this country was once an oil powerhouse. During the 1930s, the 1940s, and the 1950s, Venezuela was responsible for 15% of the world's oil production. That is massive. American oil companies were deeply involved in developing Venezuela's oil fields during this golden era. The relationship was mutually beneficial, at least for a while. Venezuela got the technology and expertise it needed, while American companies made substantial profits. But that arrangement would not last forever. Everything changed when Hugo Chavez came to power. Chavez looked at the oil flowing out of his country and the profits American companies were making, and he was not happy with the deal. He believed American corporations were getting rich while ordinary Venezuelans saw very little benefit. In the early 2000s, Chavez made a bold move. He nationalized major oil projects, taking control away from foreign companies. He did it without compensating those companies for their investments and assets. This is why the US now still refers to it as stolen oil today. Most American oil companies refused to cooperate with this new arrangement and pulled out of Venezuela entirely. When Maduro succeeded Chavez, he continued down the same path, further antagonizing the US and other Western nations. The response from the US and its allies was predictable. Sanctions. These sanctions made it extremely difficult for Venezuela to sell its oil on international markets. The country found itself increasingly isolated from the global economy. But the problems did not stop there. Both Chavez and Maduro made a critical mistake that would prove devastating. They replaced experienced technical staff at PDVSA, the state-owned oil company, with political loyalists. Technical expertise took a backseat to political loyalty. The result? The oil industry began to crumble. Production that once exceeded 3 million barrels per day collapsed to under 1 million. A country with the world's largest oil reserves found itself in an economic crisis. The combination of lost American expertise, crippling sanctions, and widespread corruption had created a perfect storm. Now, here is where it gets even more complicated. Not all oil is created equal. The oil beneath Venezuela's soil is what is called heavy crude. Think of it like this. Light crude flows like water, while heavy crude flows more like tar or molasses. This matters because heavy crude is much harder and much more expensive to extract and to refine. The process is not clean, it is not climate friendly, and it requires specialized equipment and deep technical expertise. Competing with countries that have easy access to light crude is incredibly challenging. Sure, there is global demand for heavy crude, but the profit margins are tight. Venezuela's problem is even worse because decades of neglect have left the infrastructure in shambles. Much of the equipment is outdated, broken, or simply gone. This is not something you can fix with a few months of work and some investment. So what would it actually take to get Venezuela's oil industry back up and running? According to energy experts, we are looking at a timeline of decades, not years. The financial investment needed is somewhere between 50 and 70 billion euros. That is billion with a capital B. And money is not even the biggest problem. Venezuela has lost most of its institutional knowledge about managing and producing oil. The expertise that took decades to build has evaporated. You cannot just throw money at that problem and expect it to disappear overnight. American oil companies know this. They are not going to rush in blindly. As one expert put it, they will think long and hard before making even limited investments in Venezuela. The risks are high, the costs are enormous, and the timeline for profitability stretches far into the future. Interestingly, there was already one American company still operating in Venezuela, Chevron. They maintained a relatively significant presence even through the sanctions. The United States could have worked through existing channels like Chevron to gradually rebuild Venezuela's oil sector without military intervention. But clearly, that is not the approach he chose. So if the oil business case is so complicated, why is America so focused on Venezuela? The answer lies in geopolitics, specifically China. China has become the dominant buyer of Venezuelan oil. While American companies pulled out and sanctions limited Venezuela's options, China stepped in. They have been purchasing Venezuelan crude and extending loans, building significant economic and political influence in America's backyard. For the US, this is unacceptable. The Monroe Doctrine might be nearly 200 years old, but its spirit lives on in American foreign policy. The United States does not want rival powers building influence in South America, and China's growing presence in Venezuela represents exactly that threat. This is where the president's business mindset and geopolitical strategy merge. He sees an opportunity to accomplish multiple goals at once, secure access to oil reserves, push out Chinese influence, and assert American dominance in the Western Hemisphere. This dual motivation, combining commercial interests with power politics, is classic for the present government. For them, pursuing business opportunities for America and imposing his will on another part of the world are not separate objectives. They are two sides of the same coin. The US views Venezuela through a transactional lens. There is a massive oil reserve currently controlled by an unfriendly government aligned with a strategic rival. In his mind, the solution is straightforward: remove the obstacle, that being Maduro's government, and clear the path for American companies to move in. But reality, as we've seen, is far more complex than America's rhetoric suggests. Even with Maduro out of the picture, the challenges facing Venezuela's oil industry are enormous and deeply structural. So what happens now? That's the billion-dollar, or rather, the 50 to 70 billion euro question. America has made bold promises about American companies investing in and reviving Venezuela's oil production. But those companies will make their own calculations based on risk and reward, not presidential declarations. The infrastructure needs decades of work, the expertise needs to be rebuilt from scratch, the heavy crude requires specialized, expensive processing, and all of this needs to happen in a country that's been politically and economically unstable for years. Even if American companies do invest, the return on investment timeline stretches far beyond a typical corporate planning horizon. This isn't a quick flip. It's a generational project. Meanwhile, the geopolitical chess game continues. Will China simply accept being pushed out of Venezuela? Will other South American countries view American intervention positively or as dangerous imperialism? Will the Venezuelan people, who've suffered under Maduro's regime, welcome American corporate involvement or see it as a return to the exploitation that Chavez railed against? Venezuela's oil story is a perfect example of how natural resource wealth does not automatically translate to prosperity. It shows how political decisions, international relations, and technical realities intersect in complex ways. And it demonstrates that even for a businessman president like him, some deals are far more complicated than they appear. The president's eye on Venezuela's oil is real, and his desire to counter Chinese influence is strategic. But turning that 300 billion barrel reserve into flowing, profitable crude, that's going to take a lot more than military action and business-friendly rhetoric. The oil is definitely there, buried beneath Venezuelan soil. Whether it stays in the ground for the foreseeable future or becomes the economic engine America envisions depends on factors far beyond presidential ambition. Technical reality, economic viability, and geopolitical complexity will ultimately determine Venezuela's oil future, not bold statements from Washington. Thanks for watching. If you found this analysis helpful, do not forget to like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments. Do you think American companies will actually invest heavily in Venezuela, or is America's oil dream destined to remain just that, a dream?